Hello and welcome to the Rise Up with Orriant podcast. Thank you so much for joining us for our very first Orriant book club. This was a recommendation that came from Jenny, who is with us today, because she is an avid reader, and I think she reads almost every single health and wellness, self-help, motivational book that is out there. So she is truly an expert, and she's bringing one of her very favorites to the chat today. So I want to do a quick introduction as we roll into our book club discussion, since it's the first of this series this year. We have got three amazing health coaches of ours that are on the webinar today. So many of you probably recognize Jenny. She's been with us many times before. She is our resident meditation expert as well. So just a quick reminder on how wonderful Jenny is, but she's our clinical training manager with Orriant. She's responsible for continuous quality improvement, performance management, and behavioral skills training with the Orriant coaching department. Jenny has a Bachelor's of Science degree from the Brigham Young University, specializing in exercise physiology and wellness. She's also a CDC certified diabetes prevention coach. We also have a new face. It's been a little while, Shell. Shell also holds a bachelor's degree in exercise science with an emphasis in fitness and wellness, and a business management minor. In her 20 years of experience in the fitness industry, Shell has learned that consistency is the most important factor in reaching her health goals and our health goals, if you will. And then finally, we've got Christina. Thank you, Christina, for joining us. Christina grew up as a dancer, falling in love with the art and beauty of the human body and how that translated into her bachelor's degree in exercise and wellness. She has a strong desire to help people and believes that if one can understand their body more, they can make it function better as well. So thank you to our three beautiful faces that are here as our book club experts. Thanks for being the first, ladies.
First, thanks for having us. Thank you.
So we are going to be talking about The Willpower Instinct by Kelly McGonigal. So Shell, do you want to give us a quick recap of this book and kind of why we're talking about it today?
Yes. So Dr. Kelly McGonigal is a health psychologist and professor at Stanford University. This book was inspired both by her observations as well as her experiences in trying to do her job, which is to help people manage stress and make healthier choices. And she started to observe as she was just get kind of curious about watching other people set out to do the right thing, and not always be successful in that. And in fact, many times she would see that the traditional approaches to achieving a goal would backfire. So she decided to look into the science of willpower and discovered that there was so much there that hadn't been publicly or hadn't been publicized. It hadn't become public knowledge yet. So she decided to create a course called The Science of Willpower and offered it through the continuing education studies at Stanford. It quickly became one of the most popular courses, with students ranging from athletes to corporate professionals, and goals ranging from losing weight to quitting smoking to not procrastinating to paying off debts and maybe even stopping compulsive shopping, those kinds of things. The book is really interesting because you get to actually hear about some of the students from her course and how they applied principles in the book successfully. Again, you'll see the wide range. Even people who had decades-long diehard addictions were able to apply some of these tools to successfully overcome their willpower challenge. Lucky for us, only the experiments that actually worked in the real world made it into the book. So these students of Dr. McGonigal tested and tried the research. Some of the things that had been shown effective in a laboratory didn't actually translate into the real world. So what we're left with in this book is things that do work in the real world and many examples of how those things worked. So that's what inspired the book. So a question that Christina, Jenny, and I asked ourselves is who can benefit from reading this book? So I want to read Dr. McGonigal's dedication. She says, this book is dedicated to everyone who has ever struggled with temptation, addiction, procrastination, or motivation, which is to say, all of us. And then just briefly, oh, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say it's true. When I just think of the word willpower itself, I was like, oh my gosh, the ups and the downs of willpower, especially in the winter season when it's all gloomy outside. Like, where's my willpower? To just keep going. So I love that dedication.
Absolutely. And that's something that Dr. McGonigal mentions as well, as when she tells people that she teaches a class on willpower, the almost universal response is, I need more of that. And it's also the number one reason that Americans list as failing to reach their goals is not enough willpower. So the reason that it's worth your time, we always want to make things worth our time, to try to strengthen the willpower instinct, is that people who have better control of their attention, again, this is a direct quote from the book, people who have better control of their attention, emotions, and actions are better off in almost every way, any way you look at it. They are happier and healthier. Their relationships are more satisfying and last longer. They make more money and go further in their careers. They are better able to manage stress, deal with conflict, and overcome adversity. They even live longer. When pit against other virtues, willpower comes out on top. So, so there's a lot at stake here in terms of getting the most fulfillment out of life. It's worthy of our time to consider how to strengthen the willpower instinct in each of us. So Christina, Jenny, and I identified our top 5 takeaways from the book, although there are so many more. It was a difficult conversation, wasn't it, ladies,
we talked for a while.
We did.
Yeah. What these are going to be.
To narrow it down to the top 5, but at the end of the day, our top 5 takeaways, at least for today's conversation, are the physiology of willpower, getting real about your why, stress management techniques that actually work, self-compassion, being kind to yourself, and starting with the present version of yourself, not a future aspirational version or you 2.0.
Amazing. And if there's listeners that you have already read the book, obviously not a prerequisite for our conversation, but if you have any takeaways, feel free to post them in the questions as just statements. I'm happy to share those as well, but I would love to hear your takeaways as well after we dig into what these ladies decided.
Absolutely. I agree. I jumped into the desire to do this podcast just from listening to a couple of lectures by Kelly McGonigal. She's a TED Talk and a lecture on the willpower instinct. And that's what got me excited about this. So definitely don't need to have read it to get something out of it, for sure.
And if you have read it, I encourage you to read it again. This was not the first time that I read this book preparing for this podcast, but I told both Shell and Christina, it's like, I had forgotten everything. I'm going through my book. I have notes in the margins. I have Post-it notes on quotes that I like. And I was like, oh, these are great. I feel like it's the first time that I'm hearing this all over again. There's new things that are resonating with me now that didn't the first time that I read it. So it's a great reread, even if you have read it before. Or you can just listen to us.
Absolutely.
I also love this book, and we'll kind of talk about this throughout, how it's a very practical. I'm a practical person, so if you give me a something that's actually going to help me, I have to be able to do something with it, not just feel good about it. And so I feel like this has been it gives you some great real world applications and tools to actually utilize, or experiments to run to things a little differently for yourself.
For sure. So let's dig
in.
Go ahead.
We're gonna go. Okay.
Dig into those. You summarized them, so let's see what it really means. And I love what Christina said. That's the point of the podcast, so people can have a call to action. They can go out and actually implement some things that the book really is sharing with us, and it's research based, which is awesome.
Yeah. And speaking of, Christina, do you want to talk about the physiology of willpower, the first lesson that we took away from this book? Because you are its practical application. And this was one that we all easily agreed on, of being like, it's a universal experience with coaching that people will tell us either like, oh, I just need to do it, or the only reason that I wouldn't do this is because of lack of willpower. And we all
Right.
feel like, there's more to learn. Do you
Yeah.
talk more about that first one?
I love that. Yeah, because I feel like that's often something I hear the people I work with say, or even I've said to myself, oh man, if I could just do it, right? Um, and man, if we all had that answer, I think none of us, we would all be out of a job. That'd be great. We'd all have it figured out. But I think that's really kind of the first like question that this book cracks is like, what is willpower and how do you utilize it? So what we start to learn from the book about willpower is it's not just something that we are like born with, or like it happens upon us in a magical moment of excitement and determination. It's actually a resource and a physiological um, that our brains have to function. So basically, in essence, it's our brain's ability to go from this is what I want, to just think beyond what do I want now, and focus on a future goal, a future need, a future um, priority of ours. So, to think beyond immediate survival and moving past that to long-term survival, long-term needs, long-term plans. So our brain, it's a physiological thing our brain does. And because it's physiological, and maybe this goes to my background, but it just resonates with me because it clicks. I'm like, oh, that means that we can do something about this. We can, just as we eat food to power up our body, to go on a walk or do an activity, the same thing works with our brains, that we can find ways to replenish willpower. And there are also things that drain willpower. So it's definitely what I like to call a renewable resource, right? So it's not something that just like we have or we don't. We can kind of build up that skill. Um, so that was something that I got really excited about, right? And I guess it resonated with me, just because personally, I'm a recent mom, so I I often have yeah, definitely. If you've ever had that experience, or maybe you just have had an experience where um, you're very depleted emotionally, physically, mentally, then you might have felt at some point that you don't have any willpower, right? You don't have any drive to do anything, right? You're just trying to get through to the end of the day, which I think a lot of people have experienced in one time or another, kind of that survival mode. Um, which when you're in that survival mode, it's difficult to have willpower. It's difficult to think beyond your immediate needs. So I think the first thing is, first off, take care of those immediate needs, right? If you're not getting those basic, um, basic needs, have you slept? Have you eaten? Have you had some water? Have you taken a shower? I don't know. Um, you laugh, but if you're a parent or if you've had extreme stress, taking showers is a hot commodity, which I had to learn. But so that was something that really stood out to me, that kind of taking care of your basic needs can be the first layer of replenishing your willpower, so that you can think beyond the immediate. I know what are your thoughts, Michelle and Jenny, about the physiology of willpower and just kind of replenishing it and safeguarding it.
I think it can be summarized in a pretty short phrase of what I think is most applicable: of willpower can be trained and it can be drained. It's not something that you're either innately born with, because I think that's a trap that we fall into a lot, as we see someone who we admire, who we feel like is really successful, and we say, oh, like, look at them, they are so strong, they have so much willpower, I could never do that, We're like, no, they use these tools that we're going to talk about to give themselves that willpower. It's not something that is just reserved for like a chosen few, but can be trained. And then, as you were talking about with just meeting your basic needs, it can also be drained if we're not taking care of ourselves. And I think something else that stood into me that might get into our second lesson is someone hearing, being like, okay, sure, sleeping, managing stress, eating well, exercising. I get how all of that can give you better willpower. But what if I can't do those things because I don't have enough willpower?
I love it. See, we have to have the willpower as parents to just, to navigate this. I was actually going to bring up Jenny. It was like fantastic timing because I think about, as we're all moms, right? We also have to kind of like train this in our children. And it was so funny because I was actually just going to say this, that, we're trying to instill the willpower in our children as well, whether it's, just throwing in a load of laundry or putting their plate in the sink. It's so funny because we start to train these things really, really early when we probably don't even recognize that we're doing it. So anyways, that was so fantastic. I love it.
For anyone who wanted to know, that was my 3-year-old who came to tell me that he had finished his lunch and was now putting in the sink.
See?
So.
Yeah, there you go. Plate in the
all the wins of the day.
You're welcome. But that goes into, and maybe Shelley, you want to talk more about this, but a big way that can help you if you're even struggling to meet just those basic needs of understanding your motivation for accomplishing any kind of behavior and engaging any behavior that you want. Like, do you want to talk about why understanding your motivation, or what we call your why, is really helpful for that?
Really helpful for actually finding the will to train your willpower even. For example, a lot of Dr. McGonigal students would say something along the lines of, but I need willpower in order to exercise, in order to eat well, in order to do these things that you're telling me are going to give me more willpower. So I just want to mention quickly, it's incredible the return on investment. And I think it's different for we often approach healthy behaviors in terms of like, how much do I need to do for heart health? How much do I need to do for weight loss? And we know the numbers kind of surrounding those things, but the numbers for willpower are so much less. Just for example, 5 minutes of exercise can begin to replenish those willpower reserves that Christina was talking about. 10 to 15 minutes of meditation can do the same. And it can also lead to better sleep. So those are kind of the target practices that help to train the physiology of willpower. I think when you get real about your why and you look at why you actually want to accomplish what you're doing, that can be powerful. So an example from the book about this was a pre-med student who was addicted to Facebook. And that was the willpower challenge that she chose to take into this course and experiment with. And so what she finally came around to realizing is that Facebook wasn't going to make itself any less appealing to her. That wasn't their job. So her job was to make Facebook less appealing to herself. And her why was that she was so distracted by this addiction to Facebook that she was missing really important information in her lectures. And so she connected those dots to mean, I'm here to learn what I need to know to become a doctor, essentially. And so her mantra became, is Facebook more important than becoming a doctor, or something along those lines? So I think that when she could have gone into her addressing her willpower challenge in terms of, I'm addicted to Facebook and I don't want to be. But that wasn't enough to help her overcome that addiction. She really had to connect it to, but why do I want to overcome it? Oh, because it's distracting me from this vital and crucial information that I need to reach my professional goals. So that would be my insight about getting real about your why.
I love that question.
Really...
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Tara.
I was just going to say, it kind of circles back to our podcast last month as well, because we talked about value-based goals, which really just put yourself at the center of that goal, and your why and your purpose was about that. So I love that it kind of circles back, and, it, touches on that from last month as well. So go ahead, Christina.
No, I like that, right? Connecting the dots, that it all connects together. I think I like that question, that that Shell brought out from the book is this more important than this? Or is this going to lead to this? I feel like often, I feel like kind of sometimes asking those questions helps to work through a lot of those mental battles we go through. I don't know, daily basis, weekly basis, however often it is. Is this, I guess to make it more applicable, I think of like when it comes to exercise and energy, right? Is it more worth it for me to, like you said, sit down and watch TV, or is it going to be more valuable for me um to walk for 5 minutes before I go sit down and watch TV? So kind of having those questions of is this really more important? And that actually can be a really help, kind of just a enlightening question, because maybe in that moment when you're trying to decide between two important priorities, you'll have you'll be able to understand, well, actually it isn't. Maybe I do need to, and I think that that's fair. Maybe I do need to sit down and focus on my family, or on paying bills.
Oh,
She might have stepped.
I think
Activity for
Christina
me.
has- oh.
Oh, dang
You
it.
stuck for a moment.
Um,
Am I back? Oh,
yes,
am I back?
Yeah.
Okay,
you're great.
sorry. But I think just having those curious questions can really help to enlighten, and then they give us that opportunity to choose for ourselves where, which way we want this choice to go, and if that's really going to get us, help us achieve that willpower challenge.
I don't think the importance of curiosity can be under or overstated. Like I don't know which one it is. I can't say it enough, whichever one that one is, because when you are curious about yourself and you're asking yourself those questions and those self-identifying questions, it is shocking how frequently people don't actually know what they want or why they want that thing until they start going on this self-discovery journey. And that's something that talks a lot about within the book. What I teach our coaches is trying to train our participants to be both the subject and the scientist, is what we call it. So you're the one exacting the experiment, and you're also the person that's being studied of what you want to do and why you want to do it. And it's amazing what happens when you go down that road. So often we find people who, I'll go with weight loss because this is a frequent one that we hear, being like, I want to lose weight. And you're like, okay, how would your life be different if you lost weight? And they have to think about it because they haven't even thought of it. I mean, like, okay, I mean, like, what would that mean? Are there activities that you want to do that your weight's prohibiting you from doing? How would that change the way that you view yourself or the way that you feel? And the way, when you start asking yourself these questions and you're getting really, really deep into it, a lot of times it has nothing to do with actually losing weight. Or maybe it's not even something that was super important to them and they just feel this like societal pressure to lose weight because everybody's always talking about what diet they're on or like what program they're on, and it's like a social engagement thing. So I love that word, Christina, because I just don't think that its importance can be emphasized enough, of being curious about yourself, because when you are going to connect with what's actually important to you, those core values that Tara was talking about. And when you're living congruently with your core values, you have a lot more peace with yourself, you have a lot more satisfaction with your life, and when you're feeling those things, you have a lot more willpower to do those things that you really want to do when you feel like you're living congruently and with integrity. So I feel like it all comes together with that curiosity that you were talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like that's something that I've started to utilize. That concept is something I'm utilizing more and more in my conversations with my participants is, let's have an experiment, right? Let's kind of gather the data. Let's see what happens. to just learn, how does this work? Does it work for you? Does it not? So that's language that I've come to use a lot more. So if you're one of my, if that you were one of my participants, that might be, hopefully that sounds familiar to you, because I often use that language of like, okay, well, it worked. It did it. What did we learn? How do we change it? And just kind of running those experiments until it clicks.
And I feel like I might be skipping ahead accidentally, so I'll say it and then we can go back to stress management techniques. But I feel like that goes a lot with our fourth lesson and takeaway, self-compassion. When you're framing things as an experiment and it's a learning opportunity, then it's not like you failed or you succeeded. It's just you've gathered good data. Even on your worst days where you're like, well, that was a disaster, there's things that you learn when you're curious about it, when you're like, okay, well, what made this a disaster? Who was I with? What time of day was this? How had I been fueling myself? What activities had I been like? You get to like start picking things apart, and you start identifying what makes things progress for you in the way that you want and what makes things sabotage you in the way that you don't want. And you get to start adjusting your environment and yourself. But that goes into self-compassion. I jumped ahead. So we can talk.
I think it works. I actually think it works perfectly. We can
Yeah.
go back. This might have made more sense from the beginning, but we never know, right? When we're making a rough draft, what's going to actually work.
Let's jump
Hey,
it's an experiment, right?
Yes, exactly. And we're going to forgive ourselves and be compassionate, right? We did our best.
Take a different route.
Yes. So I think one of the superpowers of self-compassion is that I'm sorry, maybe I skipped ahead there. One of the superpowers of curiosity is that it removes judgment. So when we're the scientist and the subject, we're kind of thinking of someone who's being completely objective, right? We're looking at something without judgment. We're not blaming whatever results we're seeing for being different than we expected them to be, even if they're disproving our hypothesis. We're just wondering why things have turned out differently than we expected. And then we can go to work figuring out how do we approach this in a more effective way? Or maybe we make a really awesome discovery. I loved in the book some of the different scientific experiments that were brought up. Some of the discoveries that came from those experiments were never the discoveries that the researchers originally intended to find. But because they're approaching it with this curiosity and they're willing to kind of look a little deeper, they're able to find something that's had so many ripple effects in this field that we're talking about, in terms of understanding our behavior and how do we get more control over it and how do we get the outcomes that we want. So I might have just kind of guided us away from self-compassion, but maybe Jenny or Christina, can you guide us back?
Yeah. Because one of the things that really stood out to all three of us when we read this book is that people are shocked when they are told that being compassionate to themselves leads to greater willpower and greater results. It is, I don't know if it's human nature or what it is about us that we feel like we need to be really hard on ourselves, where we're like, I didn't do this. I failed at this. I can't do this. I suck at this. Like, this is something I'm terrible at. And somehow we have convinced ourselves that by essentially being mean and bullying ourselves and maybe on an extreme having self-loathing, somehow that is going to drive our behavior forward. That if like we hate ourselves enough or if we bully ourselves enough, then we'll finally get our acts together and move forward. And I feel like when I say it like that, it's almost be like, oh, well, that makes sense why that doesn't work. Because that's not how life works. Like when people are mean to you, that doesn't make you all of a sudden want to do that thing. If anything, it makes you want to like dig in your heels and say, no, or at least that might be one of my personality traits. I don't like being told what to do, but when we meet ourselves with compassion, when we offer grace to ourselves, when we offer compassion and kindness to ourselves, of saying, oh, be like, that didn't work out the way that I thought it would. What did I learn from this? Being like, how can I approach this in a more effective way? I get to try again. When we have this growth mindset, the results that we get to see are often surpass our original goals in terms of what we're able to accomplish. And it's something that feels wrong when you say it, because we like cling to this idea that it's going to give us control. When we're mean to ourselves, we like have control over it. And if we aren't mean to ourselves, then that means that we're permitting like quote unquote bad behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't like that word bad behavior, but that's kind of what it is, of like, if I tell myself that it's okay, if I give myself permission to experience this or to feel this way, then I won't make the change. And that's very hard to let go of. And that's something that, Tara, I can send you a handout that I've created to put in the show notes of different self-compassion exercises that might feel a little bit funny at first, but truly, if you give them a chance, if you see what works for you, retraining your mindset to go to self-compassion and curiosity instead of self-loathing and blame will revolutionize your success level with your goals.
Yeah. I want to insert here, Jenny, because I feel like I've had this conversation with some of my participants I'm like, well, what if you, instead of get mad at yourself every time you don't exercise, you wake up late, you eat the cookies or the donuts, what if you are nice to yourself? And I feel like often when like you said, as you present the idea, it feels somewhat logical, like, oh, that sounds nice. Like, I want to be nice to myself. But I feel like often the participants' response to me, well, then what's the alternative? How do I do it differently? Because we're so psychologically ingrained into this shame and guilt cycle, that it can often feel like there's no other option. But I think that those that handout that Jenny is talking about, the self-compassion exercises, is one way. I'm sure there's more, but there's one specific way to work on forgiving ourselves, work on breaking that shame or that guilt cycle. They actually, the experiment that they run, they learned that there's something, and this is the technical term that Kelly McGonigal calls it. It's the what the hell effect, where you eat a donut. What was that, Jenny?
I can bleep that for us if we need.
Yeah, like that effect. Sorry, everyone. But that's what they call it, and I feel like the term though very resonates with that feeling that I think, I don't say all of us have had, because the guilt and shame is so ingrained in us that we I pick Oreos because Oreos are something that I really enjoy. But you eat one Oreo and you say, I messed up. I'm a bad person. I can't believe I did this. How dare I eat a cookie? That was not in my plan. And you start to berate yourself, but then that berating often leads to, well, then what matter if I'm already a bad person, if I've already made bad choices, then I might as well just eat the whole package. And who among us has not eaten a whole package of Oreos? I have, certainly. But so I think that's kind of the aha moment, that recognize that even though shame and guilt is so ingrained in us, it doesn't actually work. And as much as we want it to, as much as our programming tells us it does, time and again, it shows us it doesn't work. So I know this is a really hard concept because we're so ingrained, but that can be one of those big opportunities to change. And it doesn't even have to be, again, maybe be the experimenter here and try to experiment with that self-compassion message, just saying like, it's okay. It happened. everyone eats cookies. I eat
Yeah.
cookies. The other person next to me eats cookies. I'm pretty sure majority of the people in this world have had a cookie in some shape or form. You're not you're not the exception to the rule. You're human. And then you move on. So it's it's hard to wrap our heads around. I think all of us can attest to that, but it
Yeah.
can be worse, certainly
And
worse.
the experiment that you talked about, that's what it showed too, of the group that was just like encouraged to have, not encouraged, but they kind of naturally have these negative self thoughts because they were on a diet. So they're like, I broke my plan. It doesn't matter. I might as well eat the whole thing. They would eat the whole thing, compared to this control group, or not control group, but the other experimental group, where they gave them self-compassion interventions. They like trained them through the shame cycle of saying, of being like, yeah, everyone has a cookie sometime. Like, it's okay. Like, there's no
Yeah.
reason to freak out. Like, thank you so much for helping us with this experiment. You're doing a great thing by having some of these cookies. Like, we appreciate it. And all of a sudden, they were able to, like, they just ate moderately. No one told them how much to eat. Like, that was just what they felt. Um, can I give like a quick plug for another book?
Oh, here she goes. Yes.
I realize that we're talking about the willpower instinct, which is fantastic. I feel like we could talk like a whole other podcast or even series of podcasts talking about like guilt and shame. There's a fantastic book called Embracing Shame, that really gets into that. So like, I feel like we have to keep on going on just for the time of this podcast.
Stay tuned.
But if this is a topic that you want to learn more about, Embracing Shame is a fantastic book. And they define the opposite of shame as curiosity. And that's kind of how it all approaches. And that goes in line with what we were talking about as well.
Yeah.
I love it.
So even if you think we're, yeah, sorry,
I
I
was
didn't
just
mean to
going to
talk
give
over
a
you.
quick example where, for me, I have to recognize it first. And I think, we've said this within this podcast, is you need to recognize your negative self-talk first. And again, it's kind of that first step of, oh my gosh, I just did it again. And I just did it this morning, a horribly hard workout. And I was like, why do I feel so horrible today? Like, why am I weak? Like, what is happening? But by the time the end of my workout happened, I was like, I am here. I got on the saddle to ride the bike. I am sweating, I'm on a 4-day streak. Like, I started to really recognize, like, why am I beating myself up? That this is just harder than I wanted it to be today, because guess what? I'm still here. I'm still doing it. So again, I had to recognize it in order to flip it. So again, really being intuitive and being present to recognize that, I think, is really one of the first steps that all of us need at times.
Yeah.
Can I use that
It's
to
curiosity.
catapult us into lesson 3, because we're going in backward, because we're going out of order. Because I love what you said, Tara, about the first step is being able to recognize it. And one of the best practices that can help you not only manage your stress, but just elevate this self-awareness is with meditation. And for anyone who's listened to me on podcast before, they're like, there she goes again. And always comes back to meditation with her. So we're keeping with the theme. But when it comes to stress management techniques that actually work, the research of showing just 5 to 10 minutes of meditation over the course of just a few weeks cannot be overstated, even for people who self-report that they are terrible at meditation, where they're like, I'm awful at it. My thoughts go all over the place. It doesn't work. I can't focus. Those people actually have like the greatest impact with meditation, because of what you were saying, Tara, is that it heightens their self-awareness. So instead of going on autopilot throughout our lives, which is what we do for most of our choices, we don't even think about it. We just kind of do it naturally. It's brought to the forefront of our minds of being like, oh, why am I doing this? Or like, what is making me choose the choice? Or I have a choice right now. It's not even on an automatic pilot of I made a decision by myself of, oh, this is the choice presented. I can be deliberate about my choice, whichever way that is. And that's a huge impact that just a few minutes of meditation, and meditation can look like just breathing and focusing on your breath, of just like focusing on your inhales and exhales, counting your breath. Like, that's it for just a few minutes. and I'll turn it over to other people because I will monopolize the conversation about this if I but
No, I
you know,
think that that's a good segue for just one of the points made in the book is by Dr. McGonigal towards the end, and kind of summary is that self-control and willpower is essentially the power of paying attention or learning to pay attention. Like to Jenny's point about so often we are on autopilot, and so we're not stopping to actually pay attention to what we're doing, or even realizing that we have a choice and that we made a choice. So it's kind of giving that power of choice back to ourselves when we start to pay attention. um it probably won't be as super effective to like go through the list of things that actually work for stress management. Maybe we can add those to the show notes, and the things that don't work. But I think that the distinction is the things that don't work are things that release dopamine, which we learn in the book is the promise of reward, but it's not actually the reward itself. Where stress management techniques that actually work, like meditation, like exercise, specifically going outside to get some sunshine, like doing activities that are meaningful to you, or creative outlets, those kinds of things, they work differently than the things we normally turn to, like food, gambling, gaming, big dopamine releasers, right?
Phones.
But the things that actually work, yes, they release serotonin and oxytocin and other feel good chemicals. So it's not, the difference is it's not the promise of reward. These activities are actually rewarding to the body and replenish, like to go back to the very beginning, that reserve that we have of willpower is a renewable resource.
And so often, Shell, we crave things that either numb us out or don't give us that reward, that stress, like the reward that comes from stress management, because of the dopamine, where it's like promised of like, oh, if you lay on the couch and watch TV for 3 hours, it will make you feel better. And yet when most people are interviewed afterwards and they say, oh, do you feel less stressed now? I think it was 83% of them, if I'm remembering the statistic correctly, are like, no, I just numbed out. And so those dopamine enhancers, like Christina said, your phone, TV, video games, gambling, like all of those things, um, are like the number one thing that people use for stress management. And it's not actually relieving any stress. It's just promising you that it's going to relieve stress. And then you come out of that fog, or you come out of that numbness, and all of it is still there.
Yeah. I think this is
Go ahead.
oh, go, sorry. I always do that, Tara. I think this is another plug of being your own, running your own experiment, right? Being your own experimentee of, I feel like, if you're unsure of how your activities are affecting your stress level or affecting your willpower, take that opportunity to reflect after your evening doom scroll, or your evening book reading, or your evening, I don't know, whatever the activity is. I guess I choose evening because that seems to be the prime time. But um, so when it, kind of just have that reflection of saying, like, can I ask that question? Be curious. Do I feel any different? Do I feel better? Do I feel worse? What kind of reactions does this bring in me, right? Did I just watch the news and now I feel like doomsday is here, and so I have all of these experiences? And not that any of those activities are bad or wrong or not okay to do. It's just that maybe they're not giving us the reward that we think that they are, right? They're not actually giving us those serotonin and oxytocin experiences. So, uh, you know, actually, as I'm saying this, I remember when COVID first hit, that one of the strategies that us as Orriant and I think other places would often do was recommending people turn off the TV and turn off the news, because it was kind of having so much doomsday conversation go through our head that it was this weird combination of like dopamine and like fight or flight experience all the time. And it was really one of the things that was just running people to the ground mentally and emotionally and physically, because it was constantly going on. So again, not because those things are bad, but because they're maybe not utilized in the right moments or not utilized for the right reward, you know. So, you know, run your own experiments, see how you feel. I mean, we do it. I always like to tell my participants, prove me wrong, please. Then we know it's not going to work.
Yeah,
And
so Christina just told us there's her call to action right there. I don't want to skip the last one, but again, that's kind of the call to action, is just go out there and do it. But Christina, I do want to go back to that last, we're kind of, you know, rounding out our time here, but the last kind of lesson that you guys talked about, Christina, you just kind of summed it up, is it's the present. It's, you know, where are you now? It's not down the road, you know, whether it's 3 hours sitting on the couch or, you know, next year, 5 years, 10 years, you know, you're focusing on the present. So I want to make sure that we really circle back to that last lesson, because I think, you know, it really hits home on, you know, so much of what we discussed in the last 45 minutes.
Absolutely. And so often we set this bar of ourselves of, this is where we are. And once I get here, that's when I can start making changes. Like, I can make these changes when this project at work is over, when my kids are all in school, when my kids are out of the house. You can tell I'm a mom. When like, it's always like, I can do this when. And we have this aspirational view of ourselves of like, oh, future me is going to do all of these things. I just need like the circumstances to be right, and then I'm going to be great. And what happens is that our future circumstances can change, and then that bar moves again, being like, okay, well, now all of my kids are in school, but being like, now I'm doing this, and now I'm doing this, and it never happened. So that really is our last lesson of, don't hold out for this future aspirational version of yourself. Start with the present of your version of yourself, and start small. So often we think in this huge aspirational view of like, oh, like once this happens, I can do all of this and it's going to be amazing and I'm going to change everything and I'll be a whole new person. Let me know how that works out for you if that happened. But more likely it's like, okay, this is the person that I am now. These are the set of circumstances that I have now. What is realistic for me right now? And that might be 5 minutes of physical activity. And I'm not even talking about exercise. I'm just talking about like, you're walking up and down the stairs carrying a laundry basket because for some reason, your 3 small children wear an insane amount of clothes. Or again, you're learning a lot about me right now, but just like, it might be something small, and that is okay. Not only is it okay, it's a great thing, because you're moving towards your why, your vision that you have for yourself of what you really want to accomplish. So don't wait for this future version of yourself. Just start today and start now with what's realistic for you.
Call to action.
Call to action.
And if you're feeling lost, we have this like kind of set of group of people here that are really good at kind of talking you through this.
Thank you.
Yes, I was just going to say,
and if you'd like some guidance, we have some actual amazing coaches who are trained to help you achieve your goals and to help build your willpower.
Yes,
and we're not going to charge you.
Yes, as Jenny and Christina and Shell have all said, you know, they're going to help you be the subject and the scientist of yourself and look at it in a different perspective. So that's also a call to action, is reach out for help if you need it while you're starting small. So last minute, you know, thoughts, ladies, that you want to share. Obviously, another call to action is, if you haven't read the book, pick it up or download it or get it at the library, whatever might work for you. But another call to action, if you haven't read the book, get out there and read it. But any last minute thoughts, ladies, that you'd like to share?
No, can I do like a quick summary of our 6 lessons again, just so, because we've been talking for a while and we've lost the plot a little bit. So 1, willpower can be trained and it can also be drained. 2, get real about your why and understand your real motivation for tackling a willpower challenge. 4, self-compassion and be kind for yourself. 3, self-management techniques that actually work. Experiment, find out what keeps you stuck and what you can do instead. And then 5, start with the present version of yourself, not a future aspirational version of yourself.
Amazing. Love it. So thank you, ladies, so much for being our book club hosts today, and Jenny for bringing your laundry list of books to the table for us to explore. Yes, for our audience, we will be doing a Orriant book club discussion once a quarter. So obviously first quarter is under our belt, but we'll be circling back next quarter with another great read or listen, if you will, to continue our Orriant book club, and you may see some of the same faces. So thank you so much for joining us. And Shell, Jenny, Christina, thanks for joining our podcast today and bringing all your expertise as a coach and a reader to us.
Thank you, Tara.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great being here.